Happy Labor Day weekend, family. For the last 3 years, we've taken the Sunday of Labor Day off from our regular Sunday worship gatherings to remind ourselves that the church is not a building and it's not just simply a worship gathering. The church was made for so much more. And so what we're going to do instead is we're going to gather tomorrow and celebrate Jesus together over some good food, some fun, and some beautiful gospel community at Oak Island Park at 11 a.m. tomorrow. And we want to encourage you to come out, bring a dish to pass, and to join us for a great time of celebrating together. It's Labor Day. And I don't know if you've ever wondered or not what Labor Day is, but it was created to celebrate Americans who labor, who work, right? It was a day to appreciate the economic and societal impact of hardworking Americans and to reflect on the progress that our country's made as a result of the American workforce. And what you need to know is you'll find that you'll spend about half of your day every weekday on work. And if you add all those hours up over the course of a lifetime, we find that the average American right now spends 1/3 of their entire existence working. It's crazy. What we need to do is we need to realize that all of us view our work through a story. Whether we love what we do or we hate what we do or maybe somewhere in between, we all view our work through some type of story in order to make sense of it. We actually do this with anything that's confusing or difficult in our lives, but we can certainly do it with our work. Like right now, whether you realize it or not, you are viewing your work through a story. There's a narrative that you're using to try to make sense of your work. And that story determines how you think about your work or how you feel about your work when you wake up each morning or how you talk to people that you work with and how well you actually do the work that you've been given to do. All of that and more is determined by the story that you've put your work into. So let's say that the story that you're operating from is, I work because I need money to do the things I like to do, right? That right there is a story. And if that's the story that you're operating out of, then that inevitably impacts how you work. That means that you're probably going to work wherever pays you enough to do the things that you want to do, whether you really enjoy the work or not, right? And there's a good chance that you're always willing to kind of jump ship for the next opportunity to take the next job that pays you maybe a little bit more, regardless of where or what it is, just so long as you can make the money to do the things that you want to do. It also will likely mean that you're going to minimize your work week and maximize your nights and weekends, because nights and weekends are where life actually happens, and you might do the minimal amount of work that you can do just to not have to get fired, because your job is no more than a paycheck. So who cares about whether you do your job well? Who cares how you treat other people at work? None of that really matters, because the only reason that you're there is to get that money and to go home. That could be one story that you're living out of when it comes to your work. Or maybe that's not the story that you're living out of. Maybe your story is something more like, I work because work gives me purpose. I work because without work, I wouldn't know who I was. And if that's you, then you're going to be prone to overworking. You're going to take your laptop home and work until late hours of the night, because the better you work, the more purpose you have. You're going to work long hours and long weeks and probably be okay with your family life or your social life or your mental health suffering as a result of it, because you need to fuel that purpose that comes from your work. The more work you do, the better work you do, the more established your purpose in the world is. You see how this plays out? Right? The way we approach our work, and often plenty of other things in life, is determined by the story that we're fitting our work into, which means for us as believers, it is so important for us to fit our work into the correct story, into the story that the Scriptures tells us about what work truly is. And the crazy part is, our story about work, believe it or not, begins on page 1 of our Bibles. So let's take a look at it in Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. All right, so the book of Genesis right here is unpacking the very purpose for human existence. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? Those are questions that people have wrestled with for thousands of years. And these verses just gave us the answer to that question. They said that God made us, one, to be his image bearers on the earth. And then it says that being made in his image includes the idea of us having dominion. The Hebrew word there for dominion is would actually be like ruling and reigning. That's actually the language for work. We probably don't think about it that way. Like when people ask you what you did at work this week, you probably didn't say, well, I just ruled over my email this week for a while, or I exercised dominion over this project or this spreadsheet. But if you think about it, That's a way of describing what work is. It's about having dominion over a certain part of creation. It's about taking responsibility for a certain task or a process or a department or a group of people, which means right there at the center of what God made human beings to do is for that, having dominion and taking responsibility for a portion of our world. Author Richard Pratt, he says it like this: God ordained humanity to be the primary instrument by which his kingship will be realized on the earth. The great king has summoned each of us into his throne room. Take this portion of my kingdom, he says. I'm making you my steward over your office, your workbench, your kitchen stove. Put your heart into mastering this part of my world. Get it in order. Unearth its treasures. Do all that you can with it. And then everyone will see what a glorious king I am. That's why we get up every morning and go to work. We don't labor simply to survive. Insects do that. Our work is an honor, a privileged commission from our great king. God has given each of us a portion of his kingdom to explore and to develop to its fullness. Like God has given each of us our own little corner of Eden to have dominion over and take responsibility for. And in the words of Richard Pratt, it's an honor and it's a privileged commission from our great king, which leads us to what I really want you to see, that your work is a blessing. It says it right there in verse 28, and God blessed them, and part of that blessing was the work that he gave them to do. Let that sink in for a second. Work is a blessing from God. And some of us treat our work more like it's a curse. And to some degree, that's true according to Genesis as well, because work eventually is cursed. But work itself is actually a blessing and was given to us before sin entered the world. It was God giving us a part of creation to take responsibility for. And it's a good thing for us to be given. Now, to get a little bit more specific on all this, let's skip over to Genesis chapter 2. And here we're going to read about the same events from Genesis 1, just from a slightly different vantage point. Let's see what it says in verse 5. When no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up, the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. And a mist was going up from the land, and was watering the whole face of the ground. And then the Lord God formed the man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to what? To work it and to keep it, right? So God created the man in order to work. In the language, in the passage, it says to work it and to keep it. So I don't know what image comes to mind when you think about Adam and Eve in the garden. Like, I think growing up, I always envisioned it as them just chilling indefinitely in paradise, maybe sipping some pina coladas from a hammock or something. I don't know why that image comes to mind, but I imagine this leisurely type of existence. And I don't really know where we get that from, because according to the story, God didn't create humanity to sit or lay around or sip on pina coladas, but to work. That's what the passage says. In Genesis 2, it says that God creates humanity in order to work the ground. And here's what I want you to notice. It's not like God needed them to do the work in order to get it done, right? It just told us before humanity existed that God was watering everything via a mist that came up from the ground. Like throughout the creation story, God creates just by speaking things into existence. And so God didn't need humanity to get this work done. He didn't give them work to do for his sake, which tells me that he gave them work to do for their sake. God didn't create them to work because he needed the help. He created them to work because it would benefit them to work. In other words, work is good for us. And this is why unemployment for a lot of people can be such a grueling, heartbreaking thing. This is why disability can not just be a physical hardship, but also a mental one. This is why all the data shows that when people can't actually work anymore, the rates of depression tend to skyrocket, because work is actually good for us. It's good for us to do, and not just for the companies that we work for, the people that our work benefits, but also for us personally and spiritually. Let's keep reading around where we left off in Genesis chapter 2. It says this in verse 10. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is Pishon, and it was the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. And the name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Cush. And the name of the third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. And the fourth river is the Euphrates. Now, to be honest, I don't know. When I first read this, I was like, what in the world is this about? Why all the detail in there? We were first talking about the garden, and now all of a sudden we're talking about rivers and metals and stones. Well, several scholars have noted that what it's meant to show us is that Eden was full of raw materials. It was full of water and metal and stones and building materials and resources. It had all sorts of potential in it. It just needed someone to come along and to draw that potential out, to come and make it into something. In other words, it needed to be cultivated. See, work is cultivation. It's taking unorganized, unstructured raw materials in our world and reshaping them into something beautiful and useful into the world. I love how Pastor Tim Keller puts it. He said it like this: work is rearranging the raw material of God's creation in such a way that it helps the world in general and people in particular to thrive and flourish. When you think about it, that's what work does. So when a farmer takes soil and seed and water and rearranges it into crops for people to eat and enjoy, when a builder takes wood from trees and rocks and metals and nails and screws and rearranges them into a home for somebody to live in, right? When a counselor takes a person's story or a person's trauma and combines it with counseling techniques and practices that help the client process what's happening in their life. Does that make sense? Like when a parent takes a baby and diapers and snacks and activities and discipline and organizes them together to develop a functioning human being. When an educator takes ideas and concepts and data points and organizes it into curriculum to teach students. When a graphic designer takes color palettes and fonts and shapes and creates something beautiful that communicates a message. All of those things, all of that work is cultivation. It's taking a collection of raw materials in our world and turning them into something that helps people and society flourish. One Hebrew scholar describes this Hebrew word for work as actively partnering with God to take the world somewhere. That's what our work is. This is the job that God gives to Adam and Eve, to take care of creation and to cultivate it, to make something out of what we've been given. He creates Adam and Eve, he puts them in this wilderness and says, all right, let's get to work. Let's take the world somewhere together. And then if you skip all the way to the last two chapters of the Bible in the book of Revelation, here's what you'll find. That one day in the future, when God makes everything as it is supposed to be, as it should be, a lot of the same imagery from Genesis 1 and 2 is mentioned once again. Like there's a tree of life, there's a river, there's a statement about God's people ruling and reigning forever and ever. There's a mention of there no longer being any curse. There's all this imagery that references back to the story of Genesis. And so in many ways, the future of the world is the return to the very beginning, but there's one really, really important difference. The world is no longer described as a garden. It's now described a garden-like city, a city called the New Jerusalem. And so there are walls and gates and streets and homes and architecture and culture. You see, the Garden of Eden was never supposed to remain a garden. It was always supposed to become a city. And so God didn't just give us work to do to keep us busy. He gave us work to do to join Him in recreating the world. And the way it gets there is by you and I partnering with God to take the world somewhere. Here's my point. When you get ready to work this week, you're not just punching the clock. You're not just doing what you do to put a little money in your pocket. You actually have the opportunity to partner with God in taking the world somewhere. Like you're not just an administrative assistant. You're partnering with God to take the world somewhere through the work of organization and assisting, right? You aren't just parenting. You're partnering with God to take the world somewhere through raising healthy, thoughtful, creative human beings that make the world a better place. You aren't just a contractor. You're partnering with God to cultivate the earth, to draw out its potential and create spaces where people can live and work and play. Even if right now you don't have a job. Like you're not just applying for jobs, you're searching high and low for the next meaningful way that you have the opportunity to partner with God to take the world somewhere. You aren't just in school right now. You're preparing in every way for you to take the world somewhere in a meaningful way. With every meeting, with every interview, with every task, with every class, with every budget, with every proposal, you are joining God in cultivating the earth, in organizing and leveraging the raw materials that He gave us to take the world somewhere and join Him in that. You see, to make your work meaningful in your life, you don't just need a new job. You don't just need a new salary. You don't need a new boss or new coworkers or really anything else. What you actually need is a new story. You see, you need to see your work the way that God sees it, with purpose and with dignity and with meaning and with value. Now, I know all of that seems like very big picture and maybe even sounds a little pie in the sky. So in light of that, here's what I want you to do today and maybe for the rest of the week. I've got a little bit of homework for you, so to speak. It's really simple, but at the same time, it's absolutely crucial for you if you want to begin to see your work through the right story. The one question I want you to spend some time answering this week is this: how does my work connect to God's story? That's the question. I want you this week to take your work, whatever it is that you do, parenting, it could be accounting or insurance, brokering, selling houses, practicing medicine, building houses, whatever it is, and I want you to begin conceptually connecting it to God's story of taking the world somewhere. I'm not saying that it's always going to be easy, but I will tell you that there's always a connection to be made. And when we see how our work connects to God's story, even if we're not terribly in love with what we do, we can still find purpose and meaning to it. We can still find motivation to get up in the morning, to go to our job, and to do our job faithfully and well, because we realize that we are partnering with God to do exactly what we were made to do, to take the world somewhere. And so if you want to feel like there's meaning, like there's purpose in your work, this is where it starts. It starts with seeing our work through the right story.